The Canberra Chess Club Club Championship of 2023, Round 6, a veritable feast. In this round, I had the white pieces and I opened with e4. My opponent played e5, and after knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5, we're in a Roy Lopez opening. After a6, I decided to enter the exchange variation by exchanging my bishop for the knight, and after he recaptured, I simply castled on the king side. Here, a very common move would be bishop g4, pinning my knight. Instead of playing bishop g4, black played the more modest move, f6, which solidifies the e5 pawn, which I was now threatening to take. But it doesn't really develop any of black's pieces, and it also loosens black's kingside position. Well, I followed up with d3, keeping my position solid. I did think about playing instead d4, but I rejected it because after bishop g4, my knight is pinned, and that means that I've really only got one defender of my d4 pawn, whilst he's attacking it twice. And there's no way for me to add a second defender, even if I play something like c3 here. Well, then he can take my knight, and unless I want to ruin my pawn structure, I take with my queen, and now after take, he's free to capture here. So, because of that sort of thing, I would be forced to capture. But if I capture, then he can play queen takes queen, and when I recapture, again he can take my knight and ruin my kingside pawn structure, which the computer actually says is the best way for white to play, but I wanted to play in my own way. I didn't want to play the computer's way, and I didn't know the computer's way. And hence I played d3, which is still obviously a very solid move. There's nothing wrong with this move. He then followed up with bishop g4, but now you'll see there's really no risk associated with this move. If he takes, I simply take back. There's really nothing here to worry about. And so I decided to instead just play h3 and ask him what he wants to do with this bishop. Are you going to take my knight? Are you going to retreat maybe back to h5? Hey, maybe you're even going to play something like this, which now would be a mistake, because after I take and you take back and I move my knight, you can't actually bring the queen into the fray, and I'll just be better. So what are you going to do after this move h3? And my opponent decided on bishop e6. Now this is something I was happy to see, because now my knight is no longer pinned, and I can just continue developing however I wish. I decided on bishop e3 because I wanted to control this c5 square, so that he couldn't land his own bishop there and, maybe harass my king one day. So after I put my bishop on e3, he put his bishop on the next most active square, which isn't c5 but d3. And I continued with knight b to d2. I did also consider instead here playing a move like knight h2, because I wanted to free up my queen to give a check up here. I also wanted to have the option of playing something like f4 to open the position. But the reason I didn't go for this in the end is because, let's say he continues with developing his knight. Even if I play this queen checking move, he can always just retreat the bishop, attack my queen, and I have to go back and say my attack was premature. I haven't really gained anything from this. My knight's in a worse square than it was before. He's more developed than he was before. What's the point of this? So I didn't do this in the end. I just developed as I had planned with knight b to d2. And my opponent played a surprising move, a very committal move. He played g5, immediately striking out at my castled king. Apparently he wasn't afraid of his own king being in the center of the board. And I can sort of see his point that it's very, very possible that if I go wrong here, he might have a very quick attack with his pawns. Attacking my knight, if my knight moves, he can take this pawn, and then when this pawn recaptures, his bishop will recapture, and my king's going to be the one that's in shambles. But I didn't play incorrectly here. As much as I wanted to play a move like knight takes pawn, I thought about it for a long time, and after pawn takes knight, yes, you can give this check, and even though he attacks you, you can win this pawn, and now you've won 2 pawns for your knight. But after you trade queens, he can immediately try and trade off your bishops, and you're not going to have compensation for the pawn you've given up. Even if you take here and end up trying to open the position, because there's no queens on the board, his king will be relatively safe. And even though you've got the better pawn structure, he has an extra pawn, and you're just not going to be winning in this position. Even though it's still probably close to even, certainly not going to be a winning position. So I ultimately decided against this move, also because after the check, he doesn't have to do this. He could even maybe run his king this way, potentially. There was all sorts of options. So I decided not to take this pawn, and instead to play the move d4. d4 strikes in the center, trying to open the center up at a point in time where his king is still stuck in the center, and his development lags behind mine. He's only got 2 bishops out, whereas I've got 2 knights and a bishop, and pawns in the center more than he does. So this should benefit me, and it's a classic counterattack if you're being attacked on the wing, to attack through the center instead, particularly if you're better developed, and especially if his king's still stuck in the center. Well, he wanted to test that theory, and so he continued with his attack and played g4, which I played as I had planned. I simply took, and when he took back, I played c3, aiming to get my queen out from underneath the pin that it was in, safe in the knowledge that my knights defend themselves, and so not particularly afraid of this pin. Even though I can no longer dislodge the pinned bishop, I can just make the pin ineffective by moving my queen out the way. That was my thinking. Well, my opponent followed up here with h5, continuing completely in a balls to the wall manner, throwing caution to the wind, and just trying to throw everything he has at my king. But I did not believe this attack, and I simply played as planned, queen b3, taking aim at his b7 pawn, and also controlling e6 square, which he might otherwise want to use for his own bishop, in the case that I play something like this soon and attack that bishop. Well, after queen b3 attacking the pawn, he wanted to defend the pawn, so he played b5. Again, a very committal and a very loosening move. Loose in that it opens up this position, and you got to wonder where he's going to go with his king. Surely he's not going to castle short. Even if he castles long, it's going to be a very vulnerable position for his king here. Meanwhile, I'm just about ready to open up the center. My rooks can come in. This is already going very, very well for me. Well, he continued with the move. Sorry, it was my move here after b5, and I continued with the move d takes e5. And I did this not just on the principles that it opens the center when he's less developed than me, but also for concrete reasons. And one is that if he takes with the bishop, I can capture back, and he no longer has the bishop pair. Okay, that's one reason. The other reason is that if he captures back with the pawn, I can play knight g5, defended by my bishop, so he can't capture with his queen, and also threatening queen f7 checkmate. That's the threat. And I thought, actually back in this position when I was thinking about taking, I imagined him taking with the pawn, playing knight g5, seeing that there was a mate threat and wondering how he could defend. And I saw that if he tries to defend with queen d7, defending this square, that this bishop here would run out of space, because here I could play f3, and all these squares are taken by my pawns, so he can't land there. And if he comes here, well, that square is attacked by both my queen and my knight, so I would still just capture the bishop there as well. So in other words, I can threaten mate, and if he responds with queen d7, I'm going to trap his bishop. Therefore, I thought that after knight g5, he would have to respond with knight h6. Knight h6 defends the checkmating square, and, good for him. But here I planned on just playing the other knight over now to f3, continuing my development, and I feel like here I'm doing better than he is. My pieces seem to dominate his. Where is his knight going to go? Can't come here, can't come here. Can go back here, but then I checkmate him on f7 with my queen. It's just a very pleasant position. My other rook can come, or either rook can come to the d file and pin his bishop. So this is what my plan was. So I played this move, taking the pawn. He captured back with his pawn, and I played knight g5, threatening mate. And well, he made a mistake. He fell into the trap. He defended it with queen d7. He had been playing very quickly up until this point. He still had more than all of the amount of time he started with. But as planned, I played f3, attacking his bishop, and all of a sudden he started thinking. Of course, it was too late to think at this point, and in his frustration, starting to huff and puff, he just continued thinking, trying to find a way to squirrel out of this position. I also kept on thinking, wondering about what he could do. I thought, if he sacrifices the bishop for a pawn, I'll just take back with my knight. That way my knights defend each other, everything is solid, my rooks can come to the d file, everything is nice. I also thought maybe he's going to play something different. Maybe he's going to play a random looking move like putting his bishop here on c5, allowing me to take the bishop so that he can get his queen to infiltrate and capture my knight. But I realized here, of course, I can play queen f7 check because his queen no longer defends the vital f7 square. And when his king moves to the side, at the very least, I'll have moves like this to pin and win his queen, pinning it to his king. So really there was nothing he could do here that was good, and the best move was in fact to castle long, which he did. And here I kept on thinking. I didn't just automatically snap the bishop off the board, because if I did, you see that my kingside pawns are kind of weak, and I don't know what's going to come next. Maybe he's going to play something like recapturing, and in the future push this further down, try and get his queen over here, or here, and get me checkmated somehow. I didn't want to deal with any of those kinds of complexities. And I also saw that this bishop's not going anywhere, can't come here, here, or here, so I have time on my hands to continue putting pressure on his king. And as I'd mentioned earlier, if he ever castled long, I was going to play the move a4 to open the position, and so that's what I did, trying to make my rook more effective, trying to keep the pressure on his bishop, but also add extra pressure on other areas of his position, so that ultimately the only thing he's going to feel is constriction and pressure all around him until he just chokes and gives up. So I played a4, and he played rook e8. With this move, he's controlling the e6 square one more time, so that he's actually preparing to bring his bishop back here, and therefore save his bishop from the jaws of my f3 pawn. So of course I thought again about taking, but I wanted to be more ambitious. I actually started thinking here about, even if he plays this move one day attacking my queen, maybe I can just let him have the queen. The specific variation I was looking at was, let's say I take here, and he comes back attacking my queen. Well, I can say, you know what, I'm going to play rook takes a6, you can have my queen, and then I'm going to check you. The king can't run this way, there's only one square available, it's this one. I can then give another check, supported by my bishop, and the king can only go back. And what if I can now bring my other rook across to try and deliver a checkmate by, something like check, and when he comes back, the other rook comes up and joins in the fun. The only problem with this is, by playing this move, I do give him time to organize some sort of a defense here. Stockfish would give the move, king running this way would be fine, and even though I give the check, he can run out of the way, and I'm not going to be able to checkmate him. So I don't have time to bring the other rook across, which means that ultimately, this attack where I sacrifice my queen it peters out into a draw by repetition because I have nothing better to do than just check him again and again and again. So I ultimately decided to abandon this rather spectacular idea, but I didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. A takes on b5 is still a great move, and it's what I played, because even if he responds with this move, attacking my queen, I can also play pawn takes pawn, so that if he takes my queen, I take his queen. And note that I take his queen with check, so after he recaptures, I can then take his bishop, and here I'm just absolutely dominating. But again, calculating this in advance was slightly complicated, and so I wasn't completely sure about it, but I still played a takes b5, not being completely sure, because I also knew that even if he attacks my queen, at the very least I can play knight takes bishop, and if something like this is played, I'm going to win a pawn and be better. So I played a4, he played this, preparing to retreat his bishop, and like I say, I took on b5, not fearing this bishop move, which he didn't even play in the end. He instead played c takes b5, allowing me to play rook takes a6, and now you can see there's a lot of pressure coming towards his king. Here he played c5, obviously not sure what else to do with himself, and I'll basically show a few final variations at this point. I thought, of course, about queen d5, which puts a hell of a lot of pressure on their bishop, and if the bishop moves, well, there's going to be lots of good options for me. If it comes this way, you'll note that at the very least I can take this pawn with check. That's at the very, very least. If he moves this way, well, there might even be a checkmate coming in these circumstances. So he'd have to be very careful. At the very least, I can also just win his queen through moves like this, which is actually a checkmate, just about. So yeah, that would put a lot of pressure on him, but I wasn't quite sure that's what I wanted to do. I also considered moves like this, which puts a lot of pressure on his c5 pawn, and he can't ever just move the c5 pawn because, again, that bishop's going to fall with a tempo on the queen. I considered just doubling the rooks, or maybe giving a check first and then doubling the rooks. I considered well, lots of moves, but the real one I wanted to show before we move on with the wrap up of this game is this move, knight c4. I was very sorely tempted to play this move, offering the knight, saying that if you take it, well, then I'm going to have check, and when he moves, I'm going to have check again, and wherever he moves, let's say back here, well, at the very least, I can play rook takes queen, he takes queen, and then I can take this free bishop. Again, that's at the very least. And if he doesn't take my knight, well, then my knight is threatening to jump in here with a check that also wins the queen. So that's another big threat. And yet another big threat is I might just take this bishop, supported by my rook, taking the bishop also with a check, also with a fork against the knight. I mean the rook. So this move, knight c4, had so many big threats, and they could not be parried by taking the knight, as we already saw. But I did see that maybe after bishop c7, he sort of takes the sting out of the move. And of course I can continue with rook d1, attacking his queen, which I saw. But after a move like he just takes, giving up the queen for a rook and a knight, of course I should be better here, and I am a lot better, but it's a bit too complex for comfort. And at this point, all I really wanted to do was ensure victory. I was getting low on time, and so ultimately I decided to play the much less flashy, but still indisputably the best move, and that is pawn takes bishop, finally cashing in on that bishop. And the reasoning is that if he takes with the queen, well, then he's given up on this bishop, so I can scoop in and take that for free, and of course this is winning for me. And if he takes with the pawn, well, then I can play rook f7 was my plan, attacking the queen, having a rook on the 7th file, a rook on the 6th file, a queen nearby, all sorts of trouble coming towards his king. He's under a lot of pressure and stress here. He doesn't want to have a bar of this. And as a result, after I took his bishop, he actually just resigned. And so that's the game for this week. I tried to keep this video a bit shorter than previous weeks. Still not quite to the 10 to 15 minute mark, but I do appreciate everyone watching. I just really wanted to show a lot of these variations to really have on record my thought process during the game. Now, I will try and keep the next one to 15 minutes, so the trend is good. Stick around, come back next week for the round 6 game. The round 7 game, actually. This one was round 6. And thank you very much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you later.